Today we're going to be making spacer beads, and we're going to make 3 beads per mandrel. That's good practice for your dexterity, but also your concentration, because you're going to need to keep all of the beads warm all of the time. We're also going to make a 3-bead set of 4 corner beads, which will give you a little practice making dots. Let's do it. Have fun. So here's a good way to practice your process. We're going to make some spacer beads. These type of spacer beads are just a small version of what we've been working on. It's a very small bagel, and they're very handy in jewelry design. You can make them whatever size you like and whatever shape and decoration or whatever. We'll keep this first one simple, and then we'll do a little more interesting second set. And we're going to do 3 beads per mandrel. Come away, pause, touch, create some distance, and then a little left to right with my left hand, so as to create the base, the width of the base, and then the glass is being sent, kind of thread and bobbin, left to right to left to right. Okay, and that's enough of that. Now, normally I'd switch hands if I were just making a singular bead, but because I'm going to be making a number of beads, I'll just stick with my left hand, so that's good practice too. I was very right-handed at the beginning, and now I'm certainly more capable with my left hand than I was before, so that's a good thing. Same idea, working on the surface of the flame. I can feel in my fingertips once it gets to that point where it's molten. Then I come away, don't change my movements, let that solidify. Okay, and then while that is cooling a bit, I'm going to get my next gather going. Okay, warm up that next work area while keeping that first bead warm. I don't want it to cool and shock. Got to keep it warm, but not molten, just warm. Come away, let it cool a little bit, then touch, create a thread, and then left to right, left to right. That gives you some width. Also means your bead's not so tall. If you go in one place only, the bead gets very tall very quick, and it makes for a more challenging melt process. Okay, that's good enough. Right away I go over and get that heat on the first bead, okay, because that one's been sitting out of the flame for a bit. I want to make sure to keep it warm, so just get into that habit. And again, if it's sitting right next to the bead I'm working on, it's already getting a lot of heat, so it's not going to get too cool. But if I'm going to make a third one, so that first one, it's going to be out of the heat much more so. So you want to make sure to always be, keep it in mind, keep it warm. Same idea, just right on the surface of the flame. The glass is heading towards the heat as it melts. It's dripping, and I'm catching it with my very slow rotation. Then it starts to speed up as it gets molten and balanced and centered and true. Yeehaw! I come away, don't change my movements. And while that's solidifying, I'm going to get that first bead warm again, okay? Alright, and then I'll do a third one. And while I'm doing the third one, I will always just be keeping the first 2 warm. Always rotating and bouncing in and out of the flame. Ya-ta-ta-ta-ta. So, come away, pause, touch, create a thread, and then a little left to right action to give you some width. Tut, 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 tut. See, right now that first bead it's out of the heat for a while, so as soon as I feel like there's enough glass there, I'm going to go boom. So I'll cut that thread and then move right over there and get that heat on it. Okay? And then the second one as well, but I'm more concerned about that first one. So now I'm going to set that glass rod down, because now I'll just move to my strong hand, my right hand, finish up with that one. First thing I'll do though is I'll get that first set, the first two beads, nice and warm, not changing the shape, I'm just getting them warm. Now I can focus on this last spacer bead without worrying that the first two are going to get too cool. Twa, 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 twa. Always follows that same process. If you let it. War is over. If we want it to be. Okay, now as that first bead is solidifying, I'm going to go back and reheat those other two. Okay, because now what I want is I want the three of them to go into the insulating material at an equal rate, so that they cool at an equal rate. Okay, so basically I'm flame annealing them all so that as they cool, they'll cool equally. So those are nice, and they're not exact. Oh no, he's imperfect. He's an imperfect machine. But that's okay. And if you make, if you sit down and make a bunch of these, it's great practice. And they're, all, very similar. So you do end up, with plenty of pairs and whatnot. So pop that in there, leave that in there for a bit. The next thing we want to do, this will be, we're going to decorate this one. And I'm going to use, this is kind of special glass. It's called EDP glass, which means it's especially expensive, basically. But it's kind of a cool glass, cool, complex, interesting. You can get some kind of cool pinks and sort of purple shades. And Lily needs some spacer beads with this and black dots. So this is a good opportunity for me to make these for you, but also for her at the same time. I think this glass actually is discontinued now. So it's a special moment. All right, so same idea. Now these beads are going to be, it's going to be a bagel shape, but then we're going to turn that into kind of a four-corner bagel by adding 4 dots. And I'll show you what I mean. Quack, 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 quack. Come away. Pause. Touch. And then that thread, left to right, left to right, left to right. Each of these beads will naturally be smaller than each of those last beads that we made, because the glass rod itself is thinner. So if you use a glass rod that's even thicker than that, then each one of your beads will naturally be bigger as well. So that's something to keep in mind, because you can feel as you're transferring glass. This is a good way actually to get a sense of how to control the quantity of glass that you send, so that when you remake beads, you can know in advance how big they'll be and how much glass they'll require. So, all right, let's set that down. I'll move to my strong hand. I'm going to melt this one down. Pop, 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 pop. Move to my strong hand for no particular reason, just because. Right on the surface. Qua, 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 qua. Come away. Let that settle. Now we're going to add dots to this bead. I switch back, but I only switch back after that glass is cooled. If I switch hands while that glass is still molten, it'll shift, it'll change shape. Okay? So I'm changing back after the glass is cool. And when I add dots, I want to make sure that the bead itself is always just cool, not hot. I don't want it to be runny. I want your designs will be cleaner if you are working on a solid foundation rather than a shifting one. Okay? And in terms of building up, this is a stringer, by the way. A stringer is just a glass rod that we pull into a thinner glass rod, and we'll do that too later. And you know how if I build up glass to make a bead, I hold it at kind of a sharper angle so that it falls up on the end, and then I can send it. This is the same idea. I'm going to hold the stringer at a sharp angle, and then ball up glass on the end of it, and then leave it behind, and then that'll be a dot that I'm leaving behind. But when I do this, I'm going to leave the flame, and then touch, and then come back to the flame and release and separate. Come back to the flame and separate. Because if I separate while the bead, while these two are touching back here, if I separate like that, I'm going to pull away a string of glass. So what I want to do is contact and then come back to the flame and then separate. Because then the flame itself will cut whatever thread that I start to create. Let me show you what I mean. Build up that gather, leave the flame, touch, come back to the flame, cut, and then turn it down so that it drips, and then turn it to the top, like that, okay? Same series of movements every single time. Makes your life easier. Come away, touch, back of the flame, cut, get that bit to drip some, like that, and then turn that to the top. And the reason I turn to the top is because I want 4 of these dots, and if there's always one in that top position, I can always tell where my next dot should be. It should be right there. And if you do that 4 times, you end up with 4 dots, and they're equally spaced, if that makes sense. Touch. And drip it down a little bit, which actually centers it, and then come back to the top, and then the last one I want to put in between those two. Okay? Drip, come back to the top. Okay? Now I'll set that down. Pop, pop, pop. I want to warm up those other 2 dots. Dots cool more quickly than the rest of the bead, so you want to keep them warm. But the thing that I want to do, I'm going to melt these in, not completely, but most of the way. But when they melt in, I want them to melt in at an equal rate. I don't want one to melt in more quickly than another, because then it messes with the design. It'll throw your design off. So the first thing I want to do is let the bead cool a little bit. Okay, not too much, because you don't want those dots to pop off and shock, you know, when it hits the flame. But let the whole thing cool a little bit, so that when you come back to the flame, everything's at an equal temperature. And now I want to direct the heat as I'm rotating. I'm directing the heat at the dots, not at the bead itself, because I want the dots to melt first, and they'll melt, and they'll enter into the surface of that bead. And I can feel it melting and balancing and all those wonderful things, right? Come away. Let that cool. Now, if you just melt it most of the way, but not all the way, and if you put down 4 dots and melt it some of the way, but not all the way, you'll get kind of this squarish shape. Rather than a bagel shape, it's got 4 corners. Okay, so that's kind of nice, and it's tactile. It feels nice. It sits differently than a bagel does. So we're going to do a few of those. Bup, 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 bup. Got to keep that first one warm, but not molten, right? get that next work area ready. Pause, touch, create that thread, and then a little left to right action. Tut, 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 tut. Left to right, left to right, left to right. All that movement's coming from my left hand. The glass rod is stationary at the back of the flame. First thing I do when I cut that thread is head over to that first bead and warm it again, because it's been outside the heat for a little bit, and I worry that it'll get cold. Okay, so you want to be sure and always, be thinking about those other beads while you're making the one that you're making. Okay, so I'll set that down, and I'll switch hands again, just because. When you're working on the second bead, the first bead is usually being kept pretty warm anyway, just because of its proximity to the bead that's in the flame. But when you've got the third bead going, then that first bead is at risk of getting cool and shocking and cracking. So again, just keep them warm, keep the other beads warm, be thinking of them when you're working on your other bead. Okay. Pop, pop, pop. Keep that warm. Warm that a little bit. Build up my gather on my stringer. Right. Wow. Let it drip a little. Turn it towards the top. And then warm up both beads. Okay. Wow. Drip, turn it towards the top, and then warm up both beads. Wow. You don't have to make that sound. I don't know what I'm doing. Alright, one more. And I'm making the sound. Wow. Got that. Get it going. Okay. And now I want to get some heat on that first one before I direct my attention to those raised dots. Again, heating the dots first, letting them enter into the surface of the bead. Okay. And then while that second bead is solidifying, I'll warm up that first one again. Okay. Now we'll do one more. Boo-wee. Okay, rocking and rolling. Up, 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 up. Come away, pause, touch. Create a thread, and then create the width of the base, and then lay that glass rod or that thread across the surface. Okay, and the first thing I'm doing is getting the heat on the first two beads. I'll come away, I'll cut that thread, and then get the heat right over there, because I don't want them to suffer, cool too much and break. So get everybody nice and hot and happy. Alright, set that down. Again, switch. Don't have to switch. It's just what I'm doing. Nobody knows why I do what I do, but I do it. Now I'll melt that. So get those first two warm. Yeah. And then we'll focus on that third bead. Stay, right in the center of the flame. Pop, pop, pop. Always touching the surface of it. Pow. Just make an impact. Quack, quack, quack. It's like touching the surface of a lake or a body of water that's not moving. Okay, and then come away. And as that third bead is solidifying, we'll direct our heat at the other two. Okay. Ooh-wee. Okay. Now, do that final set of dots. Warming up those first two. Alright, so qua. Drip it good. Whoa, he's way off center. Nobody cares. It'll still work out. Okay. Ready? Twa. Okay, get that heat on that first two. And then the last dot. Drip it good. Now, for the last time, we'll get those first two nice and warm so that they can be okay while I'm settling in this last set of dots. Twa, twa, twa. Okay, and then come away. While that's solidifying, I'm going to flame anneal. So I'm going to begin the process of flame annealing. And I'm flame annealing lower than normal just because these three were working at a different temperature than normal. It's not just one bead, it's 3 beads. And so I'm actually making things a little bit hotter than I would if I'm just flame annealing. But the idea is still the same. Pop, 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 get everything nice and warm, and then start to kind of go back and forth like that so that everything is going to cool at that same rate. Okay? This glass is kind of a bizarre glass, sort of striking glass, really, in some ways. It's very bizarre, kind of cool. I just want to let it cool a little bit, and then I'll come back to the flame and strike it as I would like a transparent red, like this one. That's the color it becomes. It starts out as that color. But this glass too, in some ways, it isn't striking, but it does alter its color or its surface texture almost if you come away and then come back. It almost becomes a little more cloudy, almost like it's matte. It's really an interesting glass. Why they stopped making it, I do not know. Alright, so now I'll come away. See, each one has a little bit of a different hue to it in some ways. It's cool though, I like those.